All right, hello. This is What's New in Adaptive Physical Education with your host, Scott McNamara. And we're bringing you the second episode of Nonprofits in the Field of Adaptive Physical Activity and Physical Education. And we'll get to that in 1 minute. And we got our new portion, What's New in History in Adaptive Physical Activity and Education. And like I said last week, we're going to actually have Jeff from this podcast start joining us, but that's not going to happen until next time. And he's working on some different things, and we're going to add a portion to the show, so I'm really excited about bringing that out. But before that, I wanted to keep going with last week, so I got some positive responses about us doing one on ASL and where are the origins from that. So I thought we'd make this one a little bit more sport-friendly or activity-friendly, and so I was going to talk a little bit about Special Olympics this time, and I think everyone has heard of Special Olympics, and everyone, I think, supports it, and they know it's a really big organization. But I kind of want to talk about where did that organization come from. Now, we all know that Special Olympics is huge. It's the world's largest sports organization for children and adults with intellectual disabilities. Provides year-round training and competitions to more than 4.5 million athletes. That's right, 4.5 million athletes. And it's all throughout the world. Special Olympic competitions are held every single day around the world. They include local, national, regional competitions, and there's somewhere around 94,000 events a year. So how did this happen? How did we develop this organization? And I'm going to introduce with that the person that a lot of people attribute the formation of Special Olympics from, and that would be Eunice Kennedy Shriver. And she saw this need for physical activity and equality for people with intellectual disabilities. Now, Eunice Shriver, or Kennedy, was a sister to John F. Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy, our former president and presidential candidate, Bobby Kennedy. Now, she also had some other siblings. One of her siblings was Rose Marie Kennedy, and that was her older sister. And stories say that she was a very young woman, beautiful and grace, but she had some behavioral issues, and they're not really all that well defined. But we're looking at like the 20s and 30s, and she had these behavioral issues, and she fell behind her success-oriented family and academic and sporting events, and had some type of mental disability that was kept secret. But we don't not quite sure what was going on with that. But her father arranged one of the first prefrontal lobe lobotomies for her at the age of 23. But it failed, and it left her permanently incapacitated. She spent the rest of her life at an institution in Wisconsin, and reports say she had minimal contact from her family. Now, her condition of her sister is believed to have inspired Eunice Shriver to launch Special Olympics. And Eunice did a lot of things in intellectual disabilities and helping them with mental health. And she helped establish a whole bunch of programs for universities, government initiatives, healthcare facilities, and support services networks for throughout the country. And in 1961, she championed the creation of the President's Panel of Mental Retardation, which was significant in the movement for community integration in the U.S. and throughout the world for people with disabilities. She was also one of the founders for National Institutes of Child Health and Human Development. And in June of 1962, Eunice Kennedy Shriver started a day camp called Camp Shriver for children with intellectual disabilities, Maryland, which I've actually been to a Camp Abilities, Maryland, which was on the Potomac River. So Potomac, Maryland is where this started. She started this camp because she was concerned about children with intellectual disabilities having nowhere to go, nowhere to play, and she knew that there was a benefit from sports activities because her family was very engaged in sport and recreational activity. So using Camp Shriver, she was also the president of the panel of mental retardation at the time, and she promoted that concept of involvement in physical activity and other opportunities for people with intellectual disabilities or cognitive impairments. So Camp Shriver became an annual event, and the Kennedy Foundation gave grants to universities and other areas to hold similar camps. Meanwhile, this was in 1962. In 1958, a Dr. James Oliver of England was conducting research that included studies that showed that physical exercise and activities for children with intellectual disabilities had positive effects that carried over in the classroom. And Dr. Oliver would later, in 1964, serve as a consultant to Camp Shriver and kind of gave a lot of research backing to them as well. Now, the first International Special Olympics Summer Games was held in 1968 at Soldier Field in Chicago. And when I say international, we have about 1,500 people, and mostly from the U.S. and Canada, that took part in one-day event and in a Chicago park. And there was a woman, Ann Burke, a physical education teacher from Chicago, and a recipient of one of the grants, and she came up with the idea for a one-time Olympic-style athletic competition for people with special needs. In 1971, the U.S. Olympic Committee gave the Special Olympics official approval to use the term Olympics. And in 1988, the Special Olympics was officially recognized as Olympics by the International Olympic Committee. I just found this really fascinating to learn more about the Special Olympics history and to know the people that pushed it and to hear the initiatives that were going on and the research as well. It's very interesting to me. Now, we're going to go back now to nonprofits, which Special Olympics is obviously a nonprofit as well. And we're going to talk a little bit with Paul Turner and Jeffrey Lee again, because Beth had to leave from the last interview. She had some doctoral things to take care of, as us doctoral students have to do. And we kind of just talked about what is nonprofit work, what are some of the obstacles, and what do we want to see in the future. So I hope you really enjoy this second portion of the Nonprofits in Adaptive Physical Education and Activity podcast. In our small fields of disability, sport, adaptive sport, fitness for people with disabilities, do you collaborate with other nonprofits in any field or in your own field right now?
Well, we definitely collaborate with other nonprofits because, you know, these other nonprofits, Scott, they have their niche, if you will, you know, and they're trying to help the same demographic in different ways, whether it's life lessons or life skills or reading or, you know, verbalizing or being able to use their arms, you know, or, I mean, you know, Jeff can add on, but, you know, we're helping people. We're helping the same, you know, broad demographic, if you will. But we have our niches, and I say let's collaborate with what we know. You know, let's use our marketing intelligence. Let's use our research, whatever we can do to help each other. And you know, I mean, I'm not being idealistic. I think if we, you know, I know everybody's out for a little their slice of the pie because, you know, you have to sustain. You have to have a model that is sustainable. But at the same time, I think we can all survive in this world because it's all needed. It's all needed. So we work with a number of different organizations, and they're not all nonprofit. But I would have to say, Jeff, I don't know what it's like in San Diego, but the majority of organizations we're collaborating with, you know, Special Olympics is one of them. Down Syndrome Guild, they're nonprofits. They're 501c3s. So.
Yeah, I mean, and the same is true for us. Like I said, we work with the city a lot, and I suppose arguably most cities are probably nonprofit at the end of the day. But outside of that, you know, as I said, we work Challenge Athletes, of course, funds, provides equipment, travel, money, etc. for a number of our athletes, and so we partner with them in that way. One of the other things that's become advantageous to us is we can provide a service to other organizations that don't have that capability. So we've partnered with, for instance, the Boys and Girls Club, where they would like to provide some adapted sports, but that's not in their wheelhouse. However, they have facilities. So we partner with them. We provide the program. They provide the facilities. something new that we're trying in San Diego, that the sort of the brainchild of the director of our wheelchair sports camp is bringing together a council of all the different adapted sports groups in San Diego to make sure that we're working together on calendaring and ultimately, we don't know what it's going to play into. Initially, it's all about just talking and meeting periodically, making sure we're not stepping on each other's fundraising activities as far as dates are concerned. But it'll be interesting to see how that grows and where that develops as far as marketing and those sorts of things. And then finally, as I said, our wheelchair sports camp has a far larger number of sports in it than our organization provides on a year-round basis. And those sports, many of them are being provided at our sports camp by those other organizations. So we'll have Wheelchair Tennis San Diego, for instance, will come out and do the wheelchair work with our athletes during the sports camp. And we have the wheelchair motocross folks that come out and do that. And so that's a great way to get people, because every kid's different, every adult's different, everybody's got a different sport or activity that they're interested in. So we'll get people coming through that stick with an ASRA program and play basketball, but others that'll go off and play tennis or go do the skateboarding, motocross type activity. So that's been a really great way to collaborate.
So volunteers. Myself running a camp for the blind, I know that getting volunteers sometimes is hard, at least consistent volunteers. So what strategies do you use to get these volunteers?
Well, with us, you guys, it's the schools are, a bastion of volunteers, because like the high schools, for example, they have community hours that they have to obtain. So these young teenagers are looking for opportunities. And so again, when we interface with these different schools, they have different programs like Buddy to Buddy, where a neurotypical child will deal with a child with a special need, and they'll be partners in different programs, whether that's sports or fitness or school or what have you. So through the schools, we kind of have a built-in group of volunteers. And then, really, kind of goes back to what Beth was saying, how you get that visibility out there, and the more that people know that you're there, if you go to our website and you want more information, one of the questions we ask is, are you willing to volunteer? So we're keeping a database of all those hand raisers that said, yeah, they'd love to help out. And so I don't know, Jeff is more established. They've been around the block longer. So I'm interested to hear how is the volunteer pool out in San Diego. But so far we have more volunteers than we have programs. So hopefully that equation kind of reverses itself in the not too distant future, where we're going to need even more volunteers. But that's our pool right now.
Yeah, and that's that's a nice problem to have more volunteers and programs. But we do from the real just detailed things. We post on Volunteer Match. We of course have our website, social media outlets to let people know we're looking for volunteers. One thing that we've learned, once you're working along with volunteers, we actually have now a dedicated volunteer coordinator to sort of be the single point of contact for anybody who's interested in volunteering, and make sure that they get training, make sure that they're put to work somewhere, what are the opportunities from the volunteer, and get that sort of all organized. As far as drawing them in, as I said, besides the social media, we get them through a lot of our events. We do some fundraising, a stroll and roll type, a run and roll type basketball tournament, and so we get a lot of able-bodied people. We actually put them in wheelchairs and have them play basketball in the wheelchair, and so they get exposed to it. So we get exposure that way. We do leverage the local schools with special people who are studying therapeutic recreation or studying physical therapy. They're a good pool of volunteers, and also just service organizations. We partner with Miss Mission Beach down here in San Diego, and Kiwanis and other organizations, and they provide us with volunteers of all sorts, both putting on, providing meals and helping out with events, etc.
Very cool. Now, I'm just going to open this up to conversation now just because so just an open dialogue because, as we're talking, I'm just kind of getting more interested. And Jeff, you said that you're from San Diego, and it sounds to me, I'm from Detroit, and Todd and Paul are from Detroit. It sounds like it's almost like a hotbed where you're at for adapted sports and recreation. And I say that, and I'm in North Dallas now, and this area right here, it's crazy how many more adapted sport and fitness facilities there are available for people with disabilities compared to when I was in Michigan. So, Jeff, is that kind of the case from when you traveled around?
Well, I probably so. I think in the Southwest, we're just you have more sunlight during the year, so you can play sports year round. Southern California in particular is renowned for that, regardless of whether it's a disabled sport or an able-bodied sport. So you go out on any given, go out to the Coast Highway where I live up in North County on any day, but especially on a Saturday morning, and everybody's out running and riding bikes, and you'll see the hand cyclists out there. It's a sports culture, and so there probably are more. As I said, we have Challenge Athletes Foundation out here. We have an Olympic training center here in San Diego that have several of our Paralympians, including gold medalist, wheelchair tennis player, and wheelchair track and field. And which we haven't discussed. That it's a new program we're going to be trying out as the wheelchair track and field world. But I think a lot of it again is just the culture of being in an area where there's a lot of sports. Again, you go into Phoenix, they have a huge adapted sports program, but again, you're in an area where it's year-round sunshine. So,
and Paul, would you kind of agree with my assessment of the Detroit area not having very limited sports and activities available for people with disabilities?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Jeff's right. It's a subculture out there. If you go out to San Diego, and I've had my family out there, I mean, everybody's outside and everybody's running. I mean, it's amazing. You just you here in Detroit, it's today it's snowing and everybody's hibernating, and so you can imagine. If you're a family with a special needs loved one, let's say you get them to school, and then you get them back home, and then you got to bundle them up, put them in the car, get them to our facility. It's challenging. It makes it that much more tenuous for these families. So. It's different. The weather does play a part. I mean, listen, for most neurotypical folks, when you don't have sunlight, you get depressed. You're not clinically depressed, but it's depressing. When the sun comes out and it's cold, if the sun's out, you feel so much better. There's challenges here. It's not the same culture. It's tough. We've had a tough time even offering families to say, listen, just bring your loved one. There's no obligation, but I think it'll be hopefully easier once we have the thaw of spring and that kind of thing, where it energizes people. Whereas in San Diego, they're all energized all the time. It seems like. So you're spot on, Scott.
And that's just a assessment, that I'm just making quickly, because I've been surprised here, and what I've kind of thought the reasoning is in North Dallas we have Texas Women's University, which is the best college in adapted sports and adapted physical education. So my thought was that the university being in this area was why there was a culture, such as Jeff was explaining. It sounds like what's in San Diego as well. But I have to believe that a area that is not as involved in recreation and activities for people with disabilities can be eventually. And, just a philosophical question of what do you think that we could do for, Paul and Todd to try to, get that culture in that area? What do you guys think?
Well, this is the start. I mean, it's there's nothing that's year round in Michigan, and you know what? I challenge people. You tell me what year round fitness facilities are out there in the entire state of Michigan. So that's number one. We've accomplished something that people are like, they're amazed. Now, granted, we haven't done anything. We're not patting ourselves on the back, but we have a facility. We have a location. And I think, again, this goes back to what Beth said earlier in the conversation about, the results from what we do. Because now we have the space. Now that we get folks involved, and little by little, those success stories, the word of mouth that manifests from that, it's going to change the culture. Whether you call it forcing the issue, I don't know. But, we're making a concerted effort to change the culture here in Michigan. So can it be done? If we said, no, it can't be done, then we're wasting our time. We know it can be done because we know it's needed. So it's just a matter of time. So I think, to answer your question, Scott, we're on the right path to changing those perceptions, attitudes, culture, whatever you want to call it. But it starts with what we're doing right now.
Yeah, and I think he's right. I think the biggest challenge, no matter where you're at. So even let's say in San Diego, and I don't know what the numbers are, but I'd be willing to bet that 70% of everybody in San Diego participates in some sort of outdoor activity, or it feels like that some days. But even my relatives back in Michigan that play hockey in the winter and volleyball in the summer and do all sorts of different things, you still have. I still would imagine, because it's the case out here, that people with disabilities don't participate at nearly that level. And the story feels like it's always the same, that people had no idea that you can participate if you have X, Y, and Z wrong with you. Recently I saw during the Pan American Games, the Pan European Games, I guess, but there was a wheelchair basketball player from Poland, I believe, who's only got one arm. And so you'd automatically discount that, well, he can't play wheelchair basketball. He does. He plays at an Olympic level because he figures out how to push his wheelchair with one arm. We're a self-limiting society where we want to say automatically that you can't do something, and it's really getting people introduced to the notion of exactly what can be done.
Wow, that was powerful, really powerful to think about, because I think it's just a cultural change. And where you're at, Jeff, it sounds like it sounds to me like a pretty ideal situation in the adapted sports. And where do you see your future going? What would be your next goals in your nonprofit?
We hit a little bit of a snag a couple of years ago. Around keeping the money going and whatnot, and so we're sort of in a rebirth phase where we've added a bunch of additional programs, and things are growing and looking really bright now. There's so much more to explore with available programs. I think in some ways, and it's a little early to say, one of our goals is to keep expanding and adding new capabilities, because one message I've heard from speaking with some folks at other organizations like out in the Coachella Valley, out in the Palm Springs, Palm Desert area this last weekend, and speaking with some other folks from Arizona, is there's so much competition. There's so many different sports available, so you need to be able to provide people with options. And what a kind of a cool situation, because it used to be if you were paralyzed, for instance, and you're back in the 60s or 70s, back in the 70s, I'll tell this story briefly. In the 70s, there was a gentleman by the name of Brad Parks who became paralyzed, and he was told, well, the only thing you can do now is you can play basketball. And he was a skier, he did other things, but basketball didn't interest him. And he just kind of sat there and said, well, what am I supposed to do if the only thing I can do is basketball? So he decided that he really loved tennis, and he created wheelchair tennis. So I think for us, it's going to be expanding more sports programs, more things that people can do so they can find that sport that appeals to them. And then everybody gets more involved at that point.
And, Beth was talking about it a little bit earlier about the WCMX, I believe. So it's like a extreme sports with chair users. That is, I don't know if you've seen it before, but it is one of the coolest things I've ever seen in person. And it's people in wheelchairs going up and down skate ramps and doing flips. And that's something brand new, I believe. And I just heard about it about a year ago.
Yeah, we had a demo at our wheelchair sports camp, but I know one of the young men that used to play with my son on our basketball team, that's become his new passion, is doing exactly that. And that's great to see, because he's all about that. And it's great when you find somebody who, a child or an adult, finds that sport that brightens their eyes and gives them energy and enthusiasm. And so, you don't want to say, oh, no, I'm sorry, that's not available to you. You have to do only this one other sport, right? It's great to be able to say, well, why don't you try this and try this and try this, and then when you find the thing that you really love.
Guys, I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show. I really, really appreciated it, and thank you so much for the invigorating, discussion. And so thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Scott.
Well, thank you, Scott. This has been great.
Yeah.